So, our next presenter will be Jamie Allen with how to measure MTTx by using SRE. What do we need to know of Jamie? Let's check. Jamie Allen is EPAM's chief technologist for AWS and site reliability based in Seattle, USA. Prior to joining EPAM in 2019, Jamie was the global head of consulting and training for TypeSafe, Lightband, creators of Scala and Akka, and the director of engineering at Starbucks, responsible for re-implementing Starbucks rewards and mobile order per pay backend systems from scratch in the cloud with microservices. He has also been an SRE leader at Facebook in the core systems containerization group, helping manage SRE for the core systems for shared platform used by all Facebook services. Jamie is the author of Effective Akka and co-author of Reactive Design Patterns. When asked him the question what kind of golden nuggets he would like to share with the audience, he said, it's okay not to be a rock star at the beginning of your career. So without further ado, I would like to ask a big applause to our next presenter, Jamie Allen, with how to measure MTTx.
Thank you, Daniel. I just want to clarify, can everybody hear me? I want to clarify that myself as an engineer, I think the first 15 years of my career were just, me programming, getting paid to do it and stuff like that. And it really wasn't until 2008, 15 years into my career, that I found something that lit a fire under me and really made me want to learn more and do more and be better. And that was Scala. There was the whole languages revolution happening at the time. And if that doesn't happen for you fresh out of college and you're not immediately working at a place like Facebook or AWS or Netflix or your dream job, don't get discouraged. Don't be afraid of the fact that success sometimes comes later in life. So anyway, I'm here to talk about how to measure mean time to anything. And that's how in SRE we tend to look at whether or not we're driving successful outcomes, whether or not we are delivering the value that we hoped whenever we built our software. And as Daniel said, I'm currently the chief technologist for AWS and site reliability engineering at EPAM. Very proud platinum sponsor of Craft Conference. It's great to see. And before this, I had a long history as somebody who was a software engineer. And it wasn't until I went to Facebook that I really started doing operations type work. And that is a really tough place to do it. We're managing millions of hosts. And the crazy thing is, if something like the ads platform goes down, everybody says, woo, that's really cool, way to go, even though no revenue is coming in. However, if the platform where all the orchestration and all the hosts are being managed and all the workloads goes down, that's a really big problem. People can't send their cat pictures, they can't use WhatsApp, they can't take pictures of their lunch and send it on Instagram. People lose their minds, they call the police. Dead serious. So it's a really, really tough job. But I learned so much there, and it was a great experience for me. And I take that, and I've applied that now with a lot of the clients that I work with at EPAM. I also have a blog, and what you see here today are sort of an amalgamation of several posts that I put on my blog. And don't worry about the link or anything. If you just look for SRE leadership and you Google that, there are no resources about how to lead SRE teams out there. So you'll find my blog pretty quickly. So what do we mean by MTTx? And I just want to real quickly sort of talk about some of the definitions. And let me point out that there aren't great resources for formal definitions for a lot of things in computer science, this being one of them. And some of them have been taken from very formal environments like the aerospace industry. And I think that Atlassian has done a great job amalgamating all this information into a single article. And there's a link down here at the bottom. But all you have to look for is Atlassian and MTTx or something, or MTTF, or common metrics. And you'll find the post. But what I want to point out here is we care about a couple of different things. We care about how often our system fails. And you see here, there's the concept of MTTF for mean time to fail, and MTBF, which is mean time between failures. MTBF has a formal definition in the aerospace industry. It represents the time between when an airplane goes in for a maintenance or something like that takes it off service, the time in between that, right? MTTf in that world would mean when you completely replace the airplane with a new one. And that's a really interesting distinction because in SRE, we don't make that distinction, and people kind of use these terms interchangeably. I don't really personally care whether somebody says MTTF or MTBF. What I do care is they're talking about the time between incidents, the time from when the last incident ended to when the next one began. Mean time to detect, when an alert fired, right, after when the incident occurred. How long did it take for us to know there was a problem? And sometimes we don't get an alert. Sometimes that's coming in the form of a customer saying there's a problem on your site and I can't use it. And so mean time to detect isn't always something that's just based upon an alert firing through PagerDuty or something like that. And then there's MTTR. And that's probably the least understood one because there's at least 4 different definitions of what R might be. I grouped them here where you say repair and restore. That means the mean time from when the incident began to when the service was restored to its previous level of capacity, previous ability, everything, right? You restored it. You repaired it. But then you see remediation and resolution. And those have the implication of being you fixed the problem. You didn't just get the service back up and running, but you got rid of what was causing the problem to begin with. You put in a patch or you fixed it with a long-term fix. The problem with tracking remediation and resolution is that can be put into a backlog. It may not be prioritized. It may get done, sometime down the road. And so I tend to focus on repair and restore because that's the point where you're servicing your customers as expected again. And then the final one, which isn't an MTT but is a very important one to the business, is the cost per incident. Are you tracking how much money it's costing your organization every time you have an incident or an outage, right? And you really want to know that because this is what's going to drive your leaders' behaviors. So, first of all, is anybody here an SRE? Is anybody working in the SRE? Okay, we have a couple site reliability engineers here in the audience. Welcome. There are a couple secondary metrics here that we also use, like how long it takes us to figure out the root cause, to perform our root cause analysis. And then also, I'm calling out the remediation and resolution as a separate MTTR, the MTT REM, right? And that's when we're completely repairing the system. But I don't care about those quite so much because they're more business focused and they can be based upon whether people have time to work on it and that sort of stuff. So, one of the really quick things I want to point out before I get into this is that these metrics can be used for evil. People within your organization can use these metrics to say, that team is a joke. They're terrible engineers. They're not doing good work. Look at how often they fail. What that does not take into account is abuse of systems. Has anybody ever worked somewhere where they had a system that was out there, maybe it was using Zookeeper. And Zookeeper is a consensus tool that allows us to say primary and secondary, hosts for data management, like databases. And if a primary goes down, we have to elect a new leader. We have to agree that this is the new primary before we allow users to start writing data again. Well, somebody might take Zookeeper and say, well, I can use that as a key value store also, and I'm going to start putting all my data inside of it. That wasn't what Zookeeper was intended for. Maybe it does kind of work, but is it Zookeeper's fault that somebody did that? No. So when you look at MTTF and somebody says, well, Zookeeper keeps going down because it's a joke. And it's like, no, Zookeeper is not designed to be your key value store. You need to switch the technologies you're using in order to fix that. Don't let people use these metrics to say that you are doing bad work. Because in a blameless culture, you would have more of the conversation of how can we get better? What is it that we're doing that allows people to create incidents and failures? That is the problem, not the engineer necessarily. So, another part of this is, and I have seen this, where teams are like, I do not want to have these metrics displayed, captured, anything. Because if we do, somebody's going to blame me. that is indicative of a bad culture, an organization where people have fear that people will use these metrics for evil. And there is no great way to get past that. You do not want to implement these if your organization, if your people are saying, don't do this, right? Because if you do, they're not going to trust you. You have to build that trust with them and then do it. Once they believe you that you're not going to use this for evil, that it's going to be used to help make the organization better, then it's safe. So, the final part about blamefulness that's really important is accountability. You do need to have the ability to say, we have been investing to try and fix this, and it's still not fixed. Why is that happening? Accountability should still be happening. It shouldn't be because somebody is a bad programmer or something like that, but there may be reasons, like they need training that would help them understand some of the reasons these problems occur. So, let's get into what these are. And at the end of the day, when you're looking at mean time to, they're latencies. And if I'm going to talk about this, I first want to point out that how many people have a dashboard that looks like this? I don't care what's on it, but just tiles and tiles of crap. When you look at it, does it tell you immediately there's a problem? No. So this whole idea of a single pane of glass is a really poor idea, right? And at Facebook, we had these beautiful monitors, and people would, put up these beautiful dashboards. It was performance art. Everybody would walk right by it and go to lunch and not notice the fact that something was red. Something was going wrong. It was just there. What's the point? Why invest in that? And then you have dashboards like this, and I don't want to call out Datadog. This isn't Datadog's fault. But if you're working at any kind of scale, you need dashboards that'll tell you where this issue is occurring, what region, what availability zone, what data center, and why. This dashboard is great if you have one host, now handling all your services, all your API calls and everything like that. 21 malicious requests, out of how many? Why is that red? If it's out of 1 million, is that a big deal? I mean, if it's out of 40, maybe it is a big deal, but it's not telling you that. And on top of that, you see down here, average latency. First of all, it's almost 3 seconds. I don't know why that's not blaring red. It should be. 3 seconds doesn't sound like a good experience for anybody. So these are the kinds of dashboards that really aren't helpful. They don't let you know what your problem is, where the problem is, and what to do to fix it. That's what your dashboard should do for you. Now, I want to make a quick call out here to Gil Tané. Gil Tané, I like to think of as the godfather of latency management. Gil has been for a very long time espousing that we should not be using average for latencies. He's been saying we should be using percentiles. You can keep track of that 50%, the mean and the average, but you really also want to know the 90%, the 95%, the 99%. Those are the experiences that are worst for your users. In the worst case for your users, this is what the latencies are. And you should care about that. The max, what is the max worst latency we see during our time window? And he has a whole tool that you can find on GitHub called HDR histogram, which will allow you to capture that and use that within your system. I highly recommend that you look up Gil Tané and coordinated omission if you want to understand more about this. Gil is one of those brilliant luminaries who can use Comic Sans in his presentations and get away with it, right? Simon Peyton-Jones is another one. You know you're really good if you can do that. I'm not, so. Anyway, when we are tracking latencies, we need to think about them in a very specific context. Now, it does not matter to me if my least important customers have bad latency. And you say, least important customers, who could that be? All you have to do is look at somebody like Amazon and Prime. Has anybody ever heard of Prime at Amazon? You buy a membership, and that allows you to, get access to the best services and be able to buy things in a special way and never pay for shipping, stuff like that. That is differentiating and tiering their customers. Every organization knows who their most important customers are. And those are the people who deserve the highest level of service. So do not track all latencies for all customers. That doesn't make sense. Think of who the most important ones are. Track their experience. Have 3 levels of them. Here's an example. You might at Amazon or AWS have, the Amazon Prime users as the top tier. And then Amazon users in general as a second tier, people buying stuff who aren't Prime members. And then ML jobs as a third tier, who are calling into your service to get data that they need to aggregate in order to be able to do stuff. By tiering them that way, now you can say that I don't care about the ML jobs and their ability to get the data fast. Why do I care about that? I'm trying to make sure those Prime customers and then the non-Prime customers get the best experience. And then use percentiles, and I'm going to show an example of this pretty soon, for your top tier customers. But also think in terms of, when you're looking at mean time to fail, what are the severity of the incidents you care about most? The ones that impact the revenue of your organization. So tier by customer, tier by severity. And that will give you an insight into the revenue impacting incidents for your most important customers. If you do that, now you've got laser focus on what the business cares about most. And then be qualitative in thought. We don't necessarily care so much about the number of incidents so much as we care about the impact of those incidents, right? And the total cumulative time of the incidents, not really useful so much as saying, where were we spending the most time and what was the cost of that to us? And that will allow you to invest in the way your services run to provide the best service to the most important people for your business. So let's have a look at something that might be a 3-month membership, a 3-month view into the mean time between failure, or MTTf, because in this case, I'm munging the two terms together. And you see here, we've got the mean at the bottom. That's the 50 percentile, right? And then I've got a 90% line, and a 95% line, and a 99% line, and then a max line. And you say, okay, we noticed that in the second month there, things got a little better, right? The mean time between failure, or mean time to fail, is an inverse latency, where longer is better. That means you've had less incidents, right? So you want it to go up. And in this case, it started coming back down. And this is where you start saying to yourself, why? Why is it coming back down? Why, are we pushing code that isn't being tested properly? Are we releasing new features that maybe are being rolled out for the first time? All of those are perfectly valid reasons. But then you get into the longer term view. And what I'm pointing out here is you don't just want to look at this in a sliding 3-month window. You want to have something that gives you also 6-month view, 12-month view, 24-month view, so that you're able to look across a wide spectrum of data, and that's where you start seeing the good stuff. The really important thing here is things got terrible right down here, and this is July of 2022. And you have to ask why. What happened here? Was it we rolled out a whole bunch of new capabilities, and there was a time crunch. We really had to get this done, and let's face it, things didn't go so well. But once we fixed all that, everything got great, right? Our max mean time between failures went super high. During that month, we didn't have a failure for like 2 weeks. Wow, that's fantastic. It started to come back down. Maybe we started pushing out new features that were developed after that initial push and fixing everything back up, and we started rolling out new features, and we started noticing things stabilizing right here. But then things got great. We focused on operational excellence, and we noticed for a couple months here that we had low incident counts and loss of time down, and it's really important to reward the team when this sort of good stuff is happening. Things are, I'm actually going backwards here. This is when things were bad. This is when things are bad. So you say, okay, well, that happened for a couple months, and we've got to fix it. And this is where you invest time to make sure that you are now having a resilient experience. You'll notice it stayed low after that, and we started having issues again. This is the point in time where you have to be asking, why are we having problems? But also note that the mean got dragged up above the percentiles here because of something that was such an outlier. That's the problem that means can have for you. Means get masked. They mask the real problem of the worst case scenario. So, The important thing to do here is create a governance framework within your organization. When we talk about SRE, very few people talk about leadership. I mention this whenever I mention my blog. The real key thing here is you do not have SREs working in isolation across teams, doing things all by themselves in a way that helps the entire organization. If they're operating completely independently, they're not talking and breaking down the walls of tribal knowledge. So how do we create activities that will allow for us to break all of that tribal knowledge out among the entire group? The first thing you do is every quarter review your MTTs. Check the mean time to fail, the mean time to detect, the mean time to repair or restore. And have the conversations about why the data got bad and is not getting better. This is where governance really has value to the organization. And if you look at certain like tech companies and stuff, they don't really value governance. They don't care about it. It's not a key focus for them because everybody's, focused on delivering cool new features and impact and all that great stuff. But this sort of activity is going to make your organization better because people are talking about what is happening and why. And then beyond that, you want to introduce a toil backlog review. Everybody in different teams has a list of things that we've got to work on to reduce toil, which are things that are in the way of being productive and are keeping teams from being as productive as possible and pushing code, right? Maybe there's manual steps in the deployment process. Maybe there's, tests that don't have environments that, are isolated enough to really give good data. So you create these backlogs across, in an individual team, and now you could say, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? Hey, you might be able to use this thing they did a couple months ago. Break down the walls. Have people talking about the different ways that the toil is being addressed in the different teams. And then finally, the critical dependency review. This is one of the biggest ones, and I have a great story about that where when I was at Facebook, we had a massive incident. I'll never forget the day. I could tell you the exact date right now. I won't because it's probably something I can't really talk about without their permission. But it was a massive incident, and everybody around the world was posting, hey, Facebook's down, and they're getting DDoSed by a malicious country or something like that. Totally not the case. The real case was somebody put a fix in at Zookeeper that took it down. I could explain why, but ask me later. Anyway, the point is, we went down, and my systems had a critical dependency on Zookeeper. And my boss called me. He's like, so, you know about the outage? I'm like, yeah, of course. He's like, why are you down? I said, well, because, critical dependency is down. And he said, you didn't have a plan for that? I was like, oh, no, I did not. I guess I should have one. Every single critical dependency of your system, you should have a backup plan for. In this case, I could have taken Zookeeper's data about the primary and secondary relationships between hosts and cached them locally, just as a readable view. And that way, in the moment Zookeeper goes down, I still have the ability to operate. I can't change anything, but I can still say, I'm here and I'm doing things in the world as I know it. So that was a pretty big learning. If you and your team are sitting down and having conversations about critical dependencies, think about the availability zones you're in. Think about the regions you're in. Think about the core services that you use, from managed services by cloud providers or databases that you use. What will you do if they disappear? Are you going to go down? Is that okay for your business? It probably isn't. How are you going to mitigate that risk? So the critical dependency review is happening in 2 separate quarters here. And make sure that you're talking about all of the core dependencies in your org that could influence, especially from a revenue perspective, what your business is able to accomplish. You'll also notice that in Q2 and Q4, when you're not doing the critical dependency review, I've added a couple of things here. Tool standardization. Have conversations about which dashboarding tools you want to use or which data collection tools you want to use. Are you going to switch to OpenTelemetry? All of that kind of stuff becomes a really important conversation, and you want the organization to be doing it on a fairly regular basis. The production readiness review is a concept inside of SRE. Has anybody ever heard of the PRR? what this is, and this is different from the definition of done, it's a list of the things that we expect out of our production systems. And you should be reviewing all of the legacy services you've deployed inside of your system at least every 2 years. Because the production readiness review should not be a document that just lives and never changes. It should always be updated as the organization and the world around you changes, right? So have a production readiness review. Make sure it's being updated by a core group of senior people who understand the necessities of your business. And then make sure you're applying that to the team. And then also check the SLOs. Make sure that your service level objectives are not aspirational. Make sure that they are clearly reflecting what the system is capable of doing as far as the core metrics we use to measure success of those systems. We call those the service level indicators. So in a lot of request response systems, the most important things you'll think about are latency and error rate. Those are the two metrics you would care about more than any other. Not throughput, not the saturation of hosts. Those things are very important to why latency may occur or error rate may occur or go up, but they aren't primary user experience metrics. Keep an eye on those SLOs and have talks and make sure that everybody in the organization agrees that the SLOs are appropriate and reflect what the system can do, is able to achieve. And you know what? If you find that you're beating your SLOs regularly, maybe that's a case, the Google book says, push more features, take yourself out in production. I will tell you that I've never met a single company who said taking yourself out in production was okay. But you do want to at least somehow reflect the fact that the SLO is outdated and maybe needs to be reevaluated. So, in months 2 and 6, when you're not doing, in quarters 2 and 4, make sure that you are doing your, tool standardization talks, your production readiness review evolution, and your SLOs, so that you're having the conversation across the organization. And the important thing here is now everybody understands how that system works, instead of everybody working in silos. Governance becomes a really big part of any organization that's going to scale. So, do you measure services or experiences? How many people track the uptime of their systems? I'm here to say that I don't like uptime. And the reason I don't like uptime is, as an example, when I built Starbucks Rewards, actually I'm going to say mobile order and pay. Mobile order and pay is the ability for you on your phone to, order a coffee and, show up at the store and pick it up. And it's going to be ready for you. And you're going to pay for it through the app and everything like that. It has dependencies on external systems, including inside the store itself, where you're going to have infrastructure like, you're going to, some stores have Kubernetes clusters, like Target. There's several others I can think of. Large retailers have whole racks in the backs of their stores and redundancies because they cannot have their sales impacted by the fact that a single server went down. However, if something happens and that whole thing goes away, suddenly mobile order and pay is not working for Starbucks. And that's actually happened. So my service in the back end running on AWS being up didn't matter at all because the experience of mobile order and pay was broken. So we shouldn't be thinking in terms of whether or not my service is up. That's okay. I mean, it's good to know that your service is up. But you have to have a much more product level focus and instead be thinking of all of the dependencies that represent a flow for a single product experience, a key customer experience. If you are a Starbucks user and you're accruing rewards, you want to see that once you bought a coffee, you got stars. And maybe you can get another coffee with the stars you've accrued. People want to do that immediately. Those are the customer experiences that matter. And so our systems are a part of that overall infrastructure, that overall system that has to work for all of that to happen. What we want to do is take the idea of uptime and focus instead on the experiences. You could still use uptime, but think in terms of the experience being up, the experience being available. So, another part of uptime that I don't really like is it doesn't necessarily say how well you're still delivering things. You may say, well, our systems are up 99.99999, however many nines you want to say, and that's great. But the flip side is, was the latency good? Were you delivering errors back to the customer because of 500s, or database retrieval wasn't working particularly well, or who knows what? It becomes really tricky to say that you are available if you don't get into the specific numbers that they represent. So, think in terms of the customer experiences you're trying to drive. And if you do that, your business is going to be more successful. And the one thing I'd like to call out here is that site reliability engineering is product-focused. Nobody thinks of it that way. Everybody thinks of it as in terms of, hey, I'm going to do some network traffic shaping, or I'm going to reduce toil, and I'm going to build new dashboards, I'm going to do some capacity planning, I'm going to do some incident management, all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, think of what each of those things represent. Trying to drive the best experience of a product. And if you aren't talking to your product owners to get an idea of what a good experience for a user is, and trying to match that, what are we doing? So, get involved with your product leadership. Get to know who the technical product managers are. And these terms can somewhat vary between different organizations. You might have to translate the term that I'm using here to the term that's used within yours. But there's got to be somebody who represents, I am the person who understands Starbucks Rewards. And I work outwardly with the organization to drive the strategy for how Starbucks Rewards is going to evolve in the future to build the customer experiences that will grow our business. I'm using that as an example. I'm not really pointing out something specific about Starbucks. But then you have the product owners who own a major feature, like the accrual of rewards, or the ability to spend them, right? And those people are the ones who are going to write things like epics. And then you've got business analysts who are going to do things like write the user stories that the engineers will then implement. And the product owners and business analysts become inward-facing to the team because of what the technical product manager is doing outward to the rest of the organization. And this represents a structure of people who understand the experience that we're trying to drive at every level. So if you're setting SLOs and you're saying that the latency for our ability to accrue rewards with all of the dependencies in that system, because it's going off to a third-party payment system or who knows what, right? We're expecting people to see the rewards in their phone within 5 seconds or something like that. How are we going to drive it? How are we going to set up the system to meet that SLO, right? Now, we may find that the actual reality is that 6 is the SLO, because that's all we can achieve based upon the external dependencies we have. And that's fine. That is reality that we face. But if it gets better, the product owners are the ones who are going to help you make a decision about whether or not you push more features faster, because you're able to already hit what was expected of you. And on top of that, you're going to have the ability to say, what do we do when things are, bad? The product owner has to make the choice of whether or not we push more features or we fix the problems that we have today. I call this the pumpkin spice latte problem. If you have a system and there's a big release coming out, and pumpkin spice latte comes out in like September or October or something like that. I actually don't even drink coffee. But when pumpkin spice latte comes out, it's a massive push for the organization. And everything is focused on delivering all of the capabilities that will be part of that new, push, that big marketing push and everything like that. It may be okay to the organization not to focus on resilience during that time. Get those features out there. Make sure they're ready as much as possible. And when pumpkin spice latte lands, then we'll focus on the things that we know are a problem. That's a product decision. And we as SREs should not be making that without input from the organization. Your product leaders are always the people who give you that kind of flexibility and thought. They give you the leadership that you need to make the right decisions around the business priorities. So if you aren't working with product owners to do this, you're probably doing it yourself. And I don't think that's probably the best way for your organization to be successful, right? As engineers, we're not good at this. Product leaders are. They represent our customers. They're the advocates for them. Let them help you. I have a lot of things about this, by the way. Like in some organizations, they don't value architecture. They'll say, hey, we don't need architects here. We're going to hire the best engineers. And they'll figure it out, which just means that nothing is architected. And the reality becomes you end up with a whole bunch of systems that don't work well together because nobody's sitting around thinking about integration and how things should work collectively and how we reduce the number of services we have because there's duplication. That happens in a lot of tech companies. Everything's so focused on move fast and break things, make sure that you're just pushing out code and delivering impact instead of thinking in terms of how do we create the best experiences and how do we create the best systems to deliver them. So if you're in an organization and you don't have architects, you don't have product leaders, you're probably doing it yourself, and that's suboptimal. Product people are my favorite people to work with, to be honest. So how can they help? They can help you identify those key metrics of customer experience, the service level indicators. They can help you set the SLOs of what we're able to deliver for those SLIs, what we can confidently say we can achieve so that we know when things aren't nominal, when things are broken. That's what's important here. They can help define the behaviors when the error budget is broken, and by that I mean if you said that your SLO was your error rate should be, 1 out of 10,000 should be a failure. That's 99.99% success. And when you break that and you've got like 5 out of 10,000, the product owners are the ones who should decide whether or not you focus on resilience or keep pushing features. And then where do you invest time? Where do you invest money to make things better? How will that drive improvement for the organization? They are the ones who can help you do that. So, here's a summary for my talk. Measure the right data about incidents. Make sure that you're thinking about these in terms of latencies. Don't let mean and average mask the realities of your user experiences and the incidents that you have. And then on top of that, do not be blameful. When something goes wrong, think in terms of how was it somebody was able to do that instead of, oh, they did that thing and it caused all the problem. No. It's something about our processes and systems that allow people to do things that break things. That's what we need to fix. And then on top of that, work closely with your product leaders. They're the best people to help you drive the best kind of outcomes for your organization. So, thank you.
So now you are a rock star, we can say, no? Okay, please use Slido to ask questions. If you have any, we have a few minutes, 5 or 6 minutes for questions. For an icebreaker, how do I get my team to buy in to SRE Gov?
This is a tough one. When you have an organization where people feel like this is the way we've always done things, it can be really tricky to get people to say, we need to talk more, we need to change the way that we collaborate. And so you have to build partnerships. This is it's actually harder in an organization that's bottoms up. You see this in tech companies. The bottoms up organization, it's engineers who are saying, here's what I do and how I'm going to do it. And as leaders, we're expected to influence them, but we can't tell them what to do. That is literally the mandate of a leader in a bottoms-up organization. You cannot say, you have to do this. So instead, you've got to start showing them the value. You have to start building out, through people who believe in what you do, a proof of the success of working in this way. And if you do that, then you'll get buy-in. I think Jason was talking a little bit about this earlier today. So getting buy-in is a really big deal. Sometimes it's data. And sometimes even data doesn't work. That's mind-blowing to me. You can have all this great data and show how the value increases when you do certain things, and people still say, nope. You know what? Those are people you just don't want to collaborate with. Keep them out.
And what was your biggest challenge when you have chosen in your life this track to go that direction? So like clients, or which was the biggest obstacle?
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
What was the biggest obstacle when you changed to that direction? Yeah.
Believe it or not, I haven't run across one. Most of the people who are looking to adopt SRE, you know what they're doing? They're hiring really smart engineers and hoping things get better. That's it. You see all these job requisitions out there for, hey, we're looking to hire an SRE. But they bring them in, they plug them in a team, and then they wait. Oh, are things better? No? We're paying this person all this money. Why aren't we seeing resilience get better? These are the kind of activities that drive better across an organization. So whenever I talk to teams and I say, this is the EPAM approach, this is the way I believe SRE needs to be implemented across any industry, I've had very few people push back against it. They say, wow, that makes an awful lot of sense. We need a governance structure. We need our senior SREs to collaborate together and make sure that we are doing SRE holistically instead of, one team does it this way, another team does it that way. There can be reasons why things are different. If you've got a storage team, they're not going to be the same thing as the app teams, right? And for good reason. But everybody should understand why and how they're different and understand that, look, the storage teams have completely different metrics and ways that they have to operate to make sure that the data is always available to us, right? Versus the app teams who are trying to make sure the experiences are being driven appropriately and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, we have a few questions now. What is your take on collaboration between architects, DevOps, SRE, roles and responsibilities?
I love it. RACI. Does everybody have a good RACI chart? I know. Isn't it great? Yeah, no. I love it. Here's the thing. When we built Starbucks Rewards and Mobile Order and Pay, and you'll see this if you go to my blog, look at SRE and product. We had, like I said, the technical product managers and the product owners and the business analysts, but we also had an architecture sidecar to that. So the technical product manager was paired with an enterprise architect for all of rewards. The technical product manager for Mobile Order and Pay paired with an enterprise architect. That technical product manager working outward with the organization is sitting there and saying, how do we need to build features that will drive the best experiences for our customers? The enterprise architect is saying, hey, what do we have to do in order to deliver that? How are we going to interface with other systems? What protocols are involved? What security must be there? All that kind of stuff. And then that trickles down into the product owners defining the epics. Those product owners are paired with solution architects who are thinking about how we architect the solutions at the epic level. And then those business analysts get paired with the team lead of the engineering team that is delivering that feature. And here's the great thing. This is going to upset some few people. We didn't have Agile. Like, no Scrum leaders. Nothing. We had business analysts driving the delivery of the actual user story with the team. There was no backlog grooming because they came and worked with the team. When we had a backlog of things that were going to be next for that team, we'd stage a little bit of that and say, this is the team you're going to be working with next sprint, and the business analyst who's going to help you deliver that next user story or the next couple of user stories. But the really cool thing was they were never leaving the team. They were always with the team. They may go off for a meeting or two, then they come back to the team. There's no, I've got to wait to hear back from the product person about what we need, when we have a question about something. And then think about this, security. We talk about shifting left all the time. Is security shifted left in any meaningful way? At Starbucks, we taught our people OWASP Top 10. We had them learn all about PCI DSS. We had them learn all about SOC 2 Type 2. But we didn't implement it inside the actual epics and user stories. So we weren't saying that we were building secure, accrual of rewards, secure redemption of rewards. And if I had to do it over, I would have had security layered into every single one of those epics and user stories so that it was fully shifted left, and the team understood all the controls that they had to meet in order to deliver that. So think about this. In a virtuous cycle of software delivery, product, architecture, engineers, and security are collectively working constantly and not disappearing and coming back in 3 months or something like that.
Okay, we are over time, so I would suggest for the people who ask the questions to connect you right here after the session. I would like to give you a small gift from CraftHub with some Hungarian delis.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And another round of applause for Jamie, please.